Azure Monitor Agent, or AMA, will be used to send logs and metrics to Azure Monitor to log analytics and to manage Prometheus. For that, it will need to authenticate and to be authorized to send data to these services. So the question here is how the Azure Monitor Agent will perform this authentication and authorization. Well, we'll discover throughout this presentation that Azure Monitor Agent will use the managed identity of the AKS cluster, where the Kube API server pod will go to use that identity of the cluster to get a token, and then it will save that token into a secret within the AKS cluster, so that the Azure Monitor Agent will go then to consume that token when it tries to connect to Azure Monitor. Let's see how this works. So when we do get daemon set for the Azure Monitor Agent, the one that collects the logs, for example, you will see that there are a pod, or there is a container that is called AAD token adapter. That one will reference a secret that is called AAD MSI auth token. If we take a look at that secret, then we can see that there is an access token, which is the access token that will give us access to the Azure Monitor, but there is also a reference to a client ID. What is this client ID? If we take a look and compare it with the client ID of the AKS cluster, if we go to the Azure Active Directory or to the Entra ID, now we call it, we can see that application ID is the one that has this object ID, and that object ID is the one used by the AKS cluster. So this is the managed identity of the AKS cluster. That one will be used in order to get access to the Azure Monitor. So that token will be created by a pod called Kube API Server, which is a pod that lives inside the control plane of AKS. So from here, if I enable AKS audit logs, I will be able to view the action performed by that pod, which is the Kube API server pod, and we see here the action is creating a token, or creating a secret into the Kubernetes cluster. You might be asking how I did get access to that data. Actually, from here, if you go to your AKS cluster, and then if you go to diagnostic settings, and then if you enable getting the logs from the Kube API server, send those logs to log analytics, for example, then from that log analytics instance, then if you navigate to the logs section, and if you run this query right here, AKS audit, so this is the table AKS audit that contains the logs coming from the control plane, we can, and then filtering on request URI that contains AAD MSI auth token, run that query, you will see the result here is multiple lines like this, and we can see one query where we can view actually the name of the secret that is created by the pod that is called Kube API server. Another interesting finding here about Azure Monitor Agent, how it works. So actually Azure Monitor Agent will not send the logs and the metrics directly to Log Analytics or to Azure Managed Prometheus. However, it will send those data to DCE. What is DCE? That is stands for the Data Collection Endpoint, which is a new component in Azure. So when you create and enable Azure Monitor with the AKS cluster, you will see that there is a managed data collection endpoint that is created for you. So actually the logs or the metrics from the cluster will be sent first to the data collection endpoint, and then from there it will be sent to the Azure Monitor workspace. And we can see that link from Azure Monitor Agent to the data collection endpoint. If we get the logs from the Azure Monitor Agent metrics, then we can see here a link to the URL of the data collection endpoint. So at summary, that was how the Azure Monitor Agent will perform authentication to Azure Monitor. So first of all, Kube API server will get a token from the managed identity of the AKS cluster, and then it will go to create a secret in which it will put that token. Then the Azure Monitor Agent will go to connect to that secret and get that token so that it uses later to connect to Azure Monitor. Thank you.